First contact gone. Wrong Admiral Kethavar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Harmony, watching the blue-green world grow larger on the main display. In his 3 centuries of service to the Vorthan Empire, he had overseen 247 first contact operations. Each one followed the same peaceful pattern: show up with a small fleet, demonstrate superior technology, offer the benefits of galactic civilization, and welcome another species into the cosmic community. It was a routine he could perform in his sleep. The planet below had been designated as Contact Site 248. The inhabitants called it New Haven, according to intercepted communications. The species called themselves humans, and they appeared to be typical developing spacefaring primitives. They had established this colony only 50 years ago, using slow chemical rockets and basic fusion technology. Their weapons were simple projectile systems and low-energy lasers, standard defensive capabilities for a species that had barely left their homeworld. Signal from the planet, Admiral, reported Communications Officer Veltar. They're requesting identification and purpose. Kethavar smoothed his ceremonial robes and positioned himself before the main communications array. This was always his favorite part of first contact, the moment when a new species realized they were no longer alone in the universe. The look of wonder and awe when they understood the vastness of galactic civilization spread before them. The main screen flickered to life, showing what appeared to be a human command center. The architecture was functional but crude, built from local materials with visible construction joints. A human female in a dark blue uniform faced the camera. Her expression showed curiosity rather than the fear or reverence Kethavar usually encountered. "This is Captain Sarah Chen, New Haven Colony Defense Coordinator," the human said in clear, direct tones. "You've entered our system without permission. Please state your intentions." Kethavar felt a moment of surprise at the authoritative tone. Most species opened first contact with expressions of wonder or concern. This human spoke as if she were addressing equals. The translator indicated no honorifics or submissive language patterns. "Greetings, Captain Chen. I am Admiral Kethavar, of the Vorthan Empire, representing the Galactic Confederation of Worlds. Your species has achieved basic spaceflight capability, making you eligible for contact. We come in peace to offer your people membership in our great civilization." Captain Chen's expression didn't change. Behind her, other humans moved with practiced efficiency at their control stations. Kethavar noticed they were activating various systems, though nothing that appeared immediately threatening. "Thank you for the introduction, Admiral," Chen replied. "We appreciate your peaceful intentions. However, we'll need time to consider any offers. In the meantime, we ask that your fleet maintain position outside our defensive perimeter while we arrange proper diplomatic protocols." The communication ended before Kethavar could explain the benefits of immediate acceptance. Around the Vorthan Bridge, officers exchanged glances of confusion. In 247 previous contacts, no species had ever requested time to consider galactic civilization. The advantages were obvious: advanced technology, interstellar trade, protection from hostile forces, medical knowledge that could extend lifespans. Only a primitive species would need time to evaluate such clear benefits. "Sir," reported Tactical Officer Nimrak, "the human colony is activating defensive systems. Energy readings suggest they're powering weapons and shields." Kethavar studied the display with professional interest. The human defensive installations were crude but numerous. Orbital platforms mounted fusion weapons that might have been impressive against other humans. Ground-based energy cannons that could threaten atmospheric craft. Missile batteries with chemical propulsion systems. Against Vorthan technology, the entire defensive network represented minimal threat. "They must not understand the situation," Kethavar concluded. "Prepare a demonstration. Target one of their outer platforms with minimum force. Disable it without causing casualties. Once they see the futility of resistance, they'll become reasonable." The order passed through the fleet network. A single Vorthan light cruiser moved forward, its main weapon charging to minimal power. The energy discharge would disable the human platform without destroying it completely. A measured response that would save lives while proving the technological gap. Brilliant crimson energy lanced across space and struck the human orbital platform. The primitive shields collapsed instantly. Atmosphere vented from multiple hull breaches. The station went dark as its power systems overloaded. Kethvar waited for the surrender signal that always followed such demonstrations. Instead, every human defensive installation opened fire simultaneously. Nuclear missiles streaked toward the Vorthan fleet. Particle beams that couldn't penetrate Vorthan shields blazed across the void in defiant displays. The disabled platform began transmitting on emergency frequencies, broadcasting damage reports and tactical updates to other human positions. "Impossible," breathed Tactical Officer Nimrak. "Their platform is disabled. Why are they escalating instead of surrendering?" Kethvar watched in fascination as human tactics unfolded. They knew they couldn't win. Their technology was centuries behind Vorthan capabilities. Their numbers were pathetic, yet they fought with an intensity that suggested they expected victory against impossible odds. More troubling was their coordination. The attack pattern showed careful planning and precise timing. These humans had been preparing for exactly this scenario. They had studied Vorthan approach vectors and weapon ranges. They knew where to position their forces for maximum effect against superior technology. "Sir, incoming transmission from the planet," Veltar reported. Captain Chen appeared on screen again. Behind her, the command center showed increased activity. Red warning lights flashed as damage reports flowed in from the destroyed platform. Instead of fear or desperation, Chen's expression showed cold determination. "Admiral Kethvar, you have fired on New Haven colony installations without provocation. This constitutes an act of war. You have 30 seconds to withdraw from our system, or we will consider your fleet hostile and respond accordingly." The transmission ended before Kethvar could respond. Around the bridge, Vorthan officers stared at their displays in bewilderment. The humans had just lost their most powerful defensive platform to a minimal weapons discharge. They faced a fleet that could reduce their entire colony to rubble in minutes. Yet their ultimatum sounded like they held the superior position. "Analysis of human weapons effectiveness," Kethvar ordered. The tactical computer provided data that should have been reassuring. Human nuclear missiles couldn't penetrate Vorthan shields. Their energy weapons were too weak to cause significant damage. Their projectile systems were primitive chemical propellants. Mathematical models suggested the entire human defensive network could be neutralized by 3 Vorthan destroyers without significant risk. Yet something about the human response troubled Kethvar. In 247 previous contacts, every species had shown clear submission signals after a demonstration of superior force. They recognized technological superiority and accepted the logical conclusion. These humans seemed to lack that basic survival instinct. "Sir, the humans are launching additional platforms," Nimrak reported. "They're deploying what appears to be mining equipment retrofitted with weapon systems." Kethvar studied the new contacts with growing bewilderment. The humans were sending civilian industrial machinery into battle. Mining ships equipped with improvised missile launchers. Cargo haulers mounting energy weapons designed for asteroid processing. Construction mechs carrying explosive charges, meant for excavation work. "They're using civilian equipment as military assets," he observed. "This violates every principle of proportional response." What disturbed him more was the apparent coordination between military and civilian assets. The improvised warships moved with the same tactical precision as regular defense forces. Someone had been training civilian crews for combat operations. The humans had been preparing for war while maintaining peaceful communications. "Dr. Marcus," Webb's face appeared on a secondary communication channel. The human appeared to be broadcasting from the colony's administrative center. Unlike Captain Chen's military bearing, Webb showed the diplomatic composure Kethvar expected from civilian leadership. "Admiral Kethvar, this is Dr. Marcus Webb, New Haven Colonial Administrator. I apologize for the hostile reception, but your attack on our defensive platform was interpreted as an aggressive act. Perhaps we can resolve this misunderstanding through diplomatic channels." Finally, a reasonable human response. Kethvar felt relief as familiar patterns reasserted themselves. Webb represented the civilian authority that would override military resistance once they understood the situation. Dr. Webb, I appreciate your diplomatic approach. The weapon's discharge was merely a demonstration of technological capabilities. No casualties were intended. Your military commander appears to have misinterpreted our peaceful intentions. Webb nodded diplomatically. I understand, Admiral. However, Captain Chen operates under colonial defense protocols. When foreign military forces attack our installations, she's required to treat them as hostile. Perhaps you could withdraw your fleet to a safer distance while we arrange formal negotiations. The suggestion was reasonable by diplomatic standards. Kethvar had dealt with similar requests during previous first contacts. Nervous species often required time to process the implications of galactic civilization. A temporary withdrawal would demonstrate peaceful intentions while allowing human leadership to convince their military forces to stand down. Very well, Dr. Webb. We'll withdraw to the edge of your system while you arrange appropriate diplomatic protocols. However, I must warn you that Galactic Confederation policy requires resolution within a reasonable time frame. Other member species are eager to welcome humanity into cosmic civilization. The communication ended with mutual expressions of diplomatic courtesy. Kethvar ordered the fleet to withdraw to a position outside the orbital defensive perimeter. This would give human leadership time to control their military response while maintaining Vorthon presence for continued negotiations. What Kethvar didn't realize was that Dr. Webb was broadcasting from an underground bunker, surrounded by military personnel coordinating defensive operations. The civilian administrator was actually a former military strategist who had been planning resistance operations since the first Vorthon ships appeared on long-range sensors. As the Vorthon fleet withdrew, human activity intensified rather than decreased. Mining operations shut down as equipment was retrofitted for combat. Civilian transport began moving supplies to hidden defensive positions. Communication networks shifted to military encryption protocols. Lieutenant Torres approached Captain Chen in the command center, carrying tactical analysis reports. The young officer's expression showed the same grim determination that had characterized human responses throughout the encounter. Captain, intelligence estimates suggest we hurt them less than expected. Their shields absorbed our nuclear strikes without significant damage. Energy weapons barely registered on their hulls. Chen studied the damage assessments with professional interest. The Vorthon demonstration had destroyed their most powerful orbital platform with contemptuous ease. Every analysis suggested that continued resistance would result in total defeat. Yet surrender wasn't being discussed in any human planning sessions. What about their tactical patterns, she asked. Predictable formation movements, standard encirclement procedures. They're approaching this like a routine operation against inferior opponents. That might give us advantages if we can break their expectations. Chen nodded thoughtfully. The Vorthons had technological superiority, but they seemed to lack experience fighting opponents who refused to follow conventional surrender protocols. Their entire approach suggested they expected quick submission after a show of force. Recommendations, Lieutenant? Guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run operations. Make them pay for every position they take. Force them to commit resources to occupation. Duties. The longer we hold out, the more we learn about their capabilities and limitations. It was a strategy born of desperation, but it represented the only viable option against superior technology. Humans had faced similar situations throughout their history. Smaller forces holding against overwhelming odds through determination and tactical innovation. The pattern was embedded in human military doctrine and cultural memory. Approved. Begin implementation of Operation Stubborn Mule. All civilian assets are now designated as auxiliary military resources. Mining equipment becomes mobile artillery. Transport ships become fast attack vessels. Construction mechs become assault units. Torres smiled grimly. Colonial population response has been excellent. Volunteers exceeded projections by 300%. Seems like everyone wants a chance to shoot at aliens who think they can just take over. As night fell over New Haven Colony, human preparations continued in underground facilities and hidden positions. Children were evacuated to deep shelters, while adults took positions in defensive networks that had been planned for years. The colonists had always known this day might come. They had prepared for the possibility that someone would try to take their world. Admiral Cathvar reviewed the day's events from his flagship's comfortable quarters. The human response had been unusual but not unprecedented. Some species required more time to accept the benefits of galactic civilization. Extended negotiations were occasionally necessary when dealing with particularly stubborn planetary governments. What he failed to understand was that humans didn't view the situation as a negotiation. They saw it as an invasion. The distinction would prove crucial in the coming conflict as Vorthon forces discovered that humans possessed a fundamental inability to recognize when they were supposed to quit fighting. The stage was set for a confrontation that would challenge everything the Vorthon Empire thought they knew about conquest, diplomacy, and the limits of biological determination. The siege that taught a lesson. 3 months had passed since first contact, and General Zaltek was beginning to understand why Admiral Cathvar had requested military reinforcements. The Moak human colony should have surrendered weeks ago. Every tactical analysis confirmed that continued resistance was futile, yet the fighting had intensified rather than diminished, as Vorthon forces established their siege positions around New Haven. Zaltek stood in the command center of his ground assault ship, studying holographic displays that showed the current tactical situation. Red markers indicated confirmed human defensive positions. Yellow markers showed suspected resistance activity. Blue markers represented areas under Vorthon control. The pattern should have been mostly blue by now. Instead, red and yellow markers covered most of the continental landmass. Status report, he ordered his aide, Commander Vextai. Sir, we control approximately 30% of strategic objectives. Human resistance has prevented expansion beyond initial landing zones. Casualties among our forces are approaching 15% across all units. 15% casualties. Zaltek had commanded successful planetary operations with less than 2% losses. The humans were using tactics that violated every principle of conventional warfare. They attacked when they should have been defending. They took offensive action when outnumbered. They continued operations after losing critical resources. Analysis of human military capabilities? Vextai consulted his data tablet with the expression of someone reviewing impossible information. Their conventional forces were eliminated in the first week of operations. Current resistance consists primarily of civilian volunteers using improvised equipment and guerrilla tactics. This was the aspect of human resistance that troubled Zaltek most. Civilian populations were supposed to cooperate with occupation forces once their military was defeated. It was a universal pattern across hundreds of worlds. Civilians focused on survival and protecting their families. They didn't voluntarily join hopeless military operations. Human civilians followed no such pattern. When their military forces were destroyed, ordinary colonists had picked up the weapons and continued fighting. Teachers became snipers. Engineers built explosive devices. Medical personnel treated wounded resistance fighters in hidden field stations. Even children participated in intelligence gathering and supply operations. Maya Rodriguez exemplified the phenomenon. 3 months ago, she had been a mining engineer responsible for maintaining excavation equipment. Today, she commanded a resistance cell that had destroyed 6 Vorthon supply convoys using mining charges and improvised explosives. Her technical knowledge allowed her to modify civilian equipment into effective weapon systems. Sir, incoming priority transmission from Sector 7, reported the communications officer. The main screen displayed the face of Captain Mordek, commanding the southeastern occupation zone. Behind him, smoke rose from what appeared to be a damaged Vorthon facility. Emergency lights cast harsh shadows across equipment that had been clearly sabotaged. General, we've suffered another coordinated attack. Human resistance forces simultaneously struck 3 supply depots and 2 communication arrays. They disappeared before our response teams could engage. Zaltek felt familiar frustration at the report. Human resistance fighters refused to hold defensive positions where Vorthon superior firepower could be brought to bear. Instead, they launched quick strikes against vulnerable targets, then melted away into civilian populations or underground tunnel networks. Casualties and damage assessment. 12 Vorthon personnel injured, none killed. However, they destroyed enough supplies to support a regiment for 2 weeks. Communication disruption will require 3 days to repair. The attacks showed detailed knowledge of our operational schedules and security protocols. This represented another troubling aspect of human resistance. They seemed more interested in causing logistical problems than inflicting casualties. Traditional military thinking focused on destroying enemy forces. Human tactics targeted supplies, communications, and infrastructure. They were fighting a war of attrition against an occupying force that depended on complex supply lines. Maya Rodriguez had perfected this approach in her sector. Her people had identified every Vorthon weakness they could exploit. Supply convoys followed predictable routes. Communication arrays were vulnerable during maintenance cycles. Personnel rotations created brief security gaps. The humans had spent months studying Vorthon operations, then developed countermeasures for every identified pattern. "Sir," Bextai interrupted, "we're receiving communication requests from multiple human sources. They appear to be offering negotiation opportunities." Finally, a reasonable development. Zalthek had been expecting civilian leadership to eventually override military resistance once the hopelessness of their situation became clear. Prolonged siege operations always ended with negotiated surrender, once rational voices prevailed over military stubbornness. Except the communication from the senior civilian authority. The screen displayed an elderly human male, broadcasting from what appeared to be an underground facility. The man wore work clothes rather than military uniform, suggesting civilian rather than military authority. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the desperate situation facing the human colony. "General Zalthek, this is Pete Morrison, representing New Haven Civilian Council. We'd like to discuss terms for ending this conflict." Zalthek felt relief at the diplomatic opening. Pete Morrison appeared to be the reasonable civilian leadership he had been expecting to emerge. Someone who understood that continued resistance would only result in unnecessary casualties. "Mr. Morrison, I'm prepared to discuss surrender terms. The Galactic Confederation offers generous conditions for species that cooperate with integration procedures." Morrison's expression didn't change. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding, General. We're not here to surrender. We're here to offer you terms for withdrawal from our world." The audacity of the statement left Zalthek speechless. Morrison represented a civilian population under siege by vastly superior military forces. His colony faced complete defeat within weeks. Yet he was offering terms to the Vorthon Empire as if he held the superior position. "Mr. Morrison, perhaps you don't understand your situation. Your military forces are destroyed. Your population is surrounded. Continued resistance will only result in unnecessary suffering." Morrison leaned forward slightly. "General, perhaps you don't understand our situation. We've been studying your operations for 3 months. We know your supply requirements, your personnel rotation schedules, and your communication protocols. We've identified 43 critical vulnerabilities in your siege operations." The old man gestured to someone off-screen. A younger human appeared, carrying technical equipment that looked surprisingly sophisticated for civilian resistance forces. "This is my granddaughter, Jenny. She's been analyzing your electronic systems. Turns out your technology isn't as secure as you thought." Jenny Morrison stepped forward with the confidence of someone half her age delivering a school presentation. "Hi there. I've been having fun with your computer networks. Want to see something cool?" Before Zalthek could respond, every display screen in the Vorthon command center flickered. For several seconds, they showed images of human resistance operations, supply convoys under attack, communication arrays being sabotaged, Vorthon personnel looking confused and frustrated. Then the screens returned to normal operation. "How did you access our secure networks?" Zalthek demanded. Jenny grinned with obvious pride. "Your encryption is really complex, but it follows predictable mathematical patterns. I wrote a program that learned your password structures by watching data transmissions. Took about 6 weeks to crack the basic protocols." Commander Vextai was checking security readings with obvious alarm. "Sir, they had full access to our tactical networks. They could have downloaded classified information or sabotaged critical systems. Instead of causing damage, The humans had used their network access to send a message. They could have disrupted Vorthon operations significantly, but chose to demonstrate their capability rather than exploit it. The restraint suggested confidence rather than desperation. Pete Morrison resumed speaking. As I was saying, General, we're prepared to offer terms for your withdrawal. Leave our system peacefully, and we'll share some interesting information about the weaknesses we've discovered in Vorthon military procedures. Continue this siege and we'll demonstrate those weaknesses in more direct ways. The communication ended before Zalthek could respond. Around the command center, Vorthon officers exchanged worried glances. If humans could access secure military networks, they potentially had access to everything. Troop movements, supply schedules, communication intercepts, tactical analyses. The implications were staggering. Sir, Vextai reported, analysis of the network intrusion suggests they've had access for several weeks. They could have caused massive damage to our operations. This revelation forced Zalthek to reconsider the entire human resistance campaign. What he had interpreted as desperate guerrilla tactics were actually carefully planned operations based on detailed intelligence. The humans weren't fighting blindly against superior force. They were fighting intelligently, using superior information to offset technological disadvantages. Maya Rodriguez represented this new understanding perfectly. Her resistance cell didn't attack random targets hoping to cause damage. They struck specific objectives at precise times when Vorthon defenses were weakest. Her technical background allowed her to exploit vulnerabilities that traditional military thinking wouldn't identify. General, the communications officer announced, we're receiving reports of coordinated attacks across all sectors. Human forces are hitting supply lines, communication nodes, and personnel facilities simultaneously. The tactical display updated with new damage reports. 17 separate attacks had occurred within a 10-minute window. Each strike targeted critical infrastructure with precision timing that required extensive coordination and planning. The humans were demonstrating their ability to operate effectively despite being surrounded and outnumbered. More troubling was the pattern of escalation. Each human attack was slightly more aggressive than the previous one. They were gradually increasing pressure while maintaining careful control over casualties. It suggested they were following a deliberate strategy rather than acting from desperation. Oldie. Pete Morrison had been implementing this strategy from the beginning. The retired soldier understood that humans couldn't win through conventional military confrontation. Instead, they needed to make occupation so costly and difficult that the Vorthans would choose to leave voluntarily. Every attack was calculated to maximize strategic impact while minimizing Vorthon casualties that might trigger overwhelming retaliation. Sir, Vextai reported, casualty analysis shows an interesting pattern. Human attacks consistently avoid situations that would result in Vorthon deaths. They target equipment and supplies rather than personnel. When our people are injured, they receive medical attention from human resistance fighters. This represented another confusing aspect of human behavior. Traditional military doctrine focused on destroying enemy forces. Killing opponents reduced their ability to continue fighting. Human resistance deliberately avoided lethal force, even when it would have been tactically advantageous. Why would they show such restraint? Zalthek wondered aloud. Unknown, sir. Analysis suggests they want to maintain the option for negotiated resolution. By avoiding Vorthon casualties, they prevent escalation that might require total war. The strategy was sophisticated beyond anything Zalthek had encountered in previous occupation operations. Most resistance movements focused on causing maximum damage regardless of consequences. These humans were fighting a calibrated campaign, designed to achieve specific political objectives rather than military victories. Jenny Morrison had provided the intelligence foundation for this approach. Her computer skills allowed human resistance to understand Vorthon operations in detail. They knew which targets were critical and which were merely symbolic. They could time their attacks for maximum impact while minimizing risk to their own forces. As evening approached, Zalthek reviewed casualty and damage reports with growing concern. Vorthon forces had suffered minimal personnel losses, but operational effectiveness was declining steadily. Supply problems were affecting morale. Communication disruptions were hampering coordination. Equipment maintenance was falling behind schedule as technical personnel dealt with constant sabotage. "Sir," Vextai announced, "incoming priority message from Admiral Kethvar." The Admiral appeared on screen from his flagship in orbit. Behind him, the ship's bridge showed signs of increased activity. Clearly, the ground situation was affecting fleet operations as well. "General, I need your assessment of the tactical situation. Fleet Command is requesting timeline estimates for successful occupation." Zaltek chose his words carefully. "Sir, human resistance has proven more effective than initial projections. They're using unconventional tactics that exploit weaknesses in standard occupation procedures. Timeline estimates are difficult to provide given current operational challenges." Admiral Kethvar's expression showed the frustration of someone dealing with an impossible situation. "General, we're facing political pressure from Confederation Command. This operation was supposed to demonstrate the benefits of peaceful integration. Extended military conflict undermines that message." The Admiral was right to be concerned. The Vorthon Empire's expansion model depended on convincing other species that joining galactic civilization was preferable to resistance. If word spread that humans were successfully fighting Vorthon occupation forces, other species might choose similar resistance when contacted. "What are your recommendations, Admiral?" "Increase pressure until human leadership accepts negotiated settlement. Use whatever force is necessary to convince them that continued resistance is futile." Zalthek felt uncomfortable with the order. Increased force would likely result in civilian casualties, which might trigger even more determined human resistance. Everything he had learned about human psychology suggested they responded to pressure by becoming more stubborn, rather than more compliant. "Sir, recommend caution with escalation. Human response patterns suggest they become more effective under increased pressure rather than less effective." The communication ended with mutual expressions of military courtesy, but Zalthek knew he was facing an impossible situation. Political pressure demanded quick resolution. Military reality suggested that quick resolution might not be achievable against opponents who refused to acknowledge when they were beaten. As night fell over New Haven Colony, human resistance forces prepared for another round of coordinated attacks. Maya Rodriguez checked her equipment in an underground workshop where mining tools had been converted into military hardware. Old Pete Morrison reviewed intelligence reports with his granddaughter Jenny, planning tomorrow's operations based on intercepted Vorthon communications. None of them expected to win through military victory. They understood the technological gap made conventional success impossible, but they also understood something the Vorthons were only beginning to learn. Humans possessed a fundamental inability to accept defeat as long as any possibility of resistance remained. The siege of New Haven was teaching the Vorthon Empire a lesson that would reshape their entire approach to galactic expansion. Some species simply didn't know when they were supposed to quit fighting.